My father's chair scraped back at the Christmas table, and before I could take a breath, he told me I was dead to him. The words hit harder than the winter wind outside. My stepmother's laugh filled the silence, cruel and satisfied, while my sister sat frozen, staring at her plate. I barely had time to react before he grabbed my arm, shoved me into the cold, and locked the door. The sound of the lock echoed louder than any argument. I stood in the snow, staring at the windows glowing with light I was no longer welcome in. I thought my story with them ended there, but the next morning my phone buzzed. A message from my sister, short and frantic, begging me to call back right away. That was when I realized nothing was over. The real story was just beginning. And it was Christmas Eve in Cleveland, and the kind of cold that seems to seep straight through your coat into your bones. My breath hung in front of me in little clouds as I walked up the cracked driveway of my dad's house, clutching a small tin of cookies I had baked the night before. I told myself that this year would be different, that maybe the sharp edges in my family would soften for one night. The house glowed with warm light, a wreath on the door, music muffled behind the walls. For a brief moment, I almost believed I was stepping back into the home I had known as a child before everything had changed. Inside the dining room, the table was dressed with red and green napkins, the smell of roasted ham heavy in the air. My dad, Robert Parker, sat at the head of the table in the chair that had always been his throne. His second wife, Linda, moved around with that smile she saved for company, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My half-sister Sophia was there too, looking nervous, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. I set the tin of cookies near the dessert tray and forced a cheerful tone into my voice. I said, "Merry Christmas." My dad gave me a tight nod, no warmth in his eyes, and Linda let out a little laugh like she knew a secret that no one else did. We sat down to eat, forks clinking against china, the conversation forced and brittle. Linda complimented her own cooking with exaggerated pride, and my dad muttered, "Agreement." I tried to ask Sophia about school, about her classes at Ohio State, and she gave me a small smile, clearly uncomfortable under her stepmother's gaze. I wanted to draw her out to give her a moment of normalcy, but it felt like every word I spoke landed wrong. The tension grew heavier with every bite. Linda began picking at me in little ways, asking why I still worked as an assistant instead of moving up, why I wasn't married yet at 27, why I had not settled down like a proper adult. My dad did nothing to stop her. He stared down at his plate as though the food was the only thing worth his attention. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I answered calmly at first, saying I was working hard, that life was not a race, that I was fine with where I was. But Linda pressed harder, smirking as though each barb was a game she was winning. I glanced at my dad, hoping for some sign of support. All I found was a hard stare that made my stomach sink. Then it happened. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling the glasses, startling Sophia into silence. His voice was harsh, loud enough to cut through the holiday music in the background. "You're dead to me." The words hit like a slap, like ice water pouring down my back. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, that he had meant something else. But his face was red with anger, his eyes burning with hatred. I could not reconcile with the man who once taught me to ride a bike, who once carried me on his shoulders at the county fair. Linda laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but a cruel one, like she had been waiting for this scene all evening. She looked at me with triumph, as though I had finally been erased from her picture of the family. I opened my mouth to speak, but my dad rose from his chair, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. He told me to get out, his voice low and final. And before I could even gather my thoughts, he walked to the front door, flung it open, and pointed into the snow. I stood frozen. Sophia's eyes were wide with fear, but she did not move. Linda folded her arms, lips twisted in satisfaction. My dad shoved me toward the door, his hand hard on my shoulder. I stumbled onto the porch, the bitter cold wrapping around me instantly. He pulled the door shut with a finality that felt like the end of something irreversible. I heard the lock click. The laughter of Linda floated through the wood, sharp and triumphant. I stood there on the porch, snow settling in my hair, my hands trembling, not from the cold alone, but from the shock that my own dad had just declared me dead to him. For a few long seconds I could not move. My feet were heavy, my chest tight. The world seemed to tilt. I thought of the cookies sitting on the table untouched, a pathetic attempt at peace. I turned and walked down the steps into the street, the snow crunching under my boots. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, but then the screen went black. Battery dead. I was truly alone. I pulled my coat tighter around me and began to walk with no destination in mind. The night was silent except for the distant hum of cars on the main road. Houses glowed with lights, families inside laughing, sharing gifts. Each sound of joy made the silence in my chest heavier. I thought about my mother, how she would have hated to see this. She had been the glue of the family, warm and forgiving, until she died in 2015. After that, everything shifted. My dad became colder, more distant, and when he remarried 2 years later to Linda, the last remnants of home seemed to vanish. I wandered through the streets, the cold biting through my boots, the scarf around my neck damp with melting snow. My mind replayed his words over and over. "You're dead to me." The finality of it was unbearable. I thought about leaving town altogether, starting over where no one knew my name. I thought about knocking on a friend's door, but it was Christmas, and who wanted a crying girl on their porch? I thought about going back and pounding on the door, demanding to be let in, but I knew it was useless. He had chosen. He had locked me out both of the house and of his heart. Eventually, I found myself at the bus stop at the corner of Elmwood and 9th. The bench was covered with a thin layer of snow, but I brushed it off and sat down, pulling my knees up to my chest. The cold metal seeped through my jeans. I buried my face in my hands and let the tears come, silent and hot against the freezing air. I remembered the way Christmas used to be when my mother was alive, when the house smelled of cinnamon and pine, when laughter filled the rooms. I could see her face as clearly as if she were sitting across from me, her gentle eyes, her soft voice telling me that family was everything. That no matter how hard life got, we always had each other. I clung to that memory like a lifeline, even as reality mocked me with its cruelty. Hours passed slowly. Cars went by, their headlights sweeping across the snow. I tried to rest, but the cold kept me awake, my body shivering uncontrollably. At some point, I pulled out the scarf again, pressing it against my face for comfort. It still carried the faint scent of my mother's perfume, a smell that made my chest ache. I told myself I would survive tonight. I had to. I would not let them break me completely. As I sat there, I thought I heard a cough carried through the wind from the direction of my dad's house. A deep hacking sound followed by silence. It was brief, but it lodged in my mind. Had I imagined it? Or had I really heard him struggling? I remembered the way he had clutched at his chest for just a second before pushing me out. The image unsettled me. Despite my anger, despite the pain, a part of me still worried. He was my dad, after all, but I pushed the thought aside. He had made his choice. By the time the sky began to lighten with the first gray of dawn, my body was numb. My phone lay dead in my pocket, no lifeline to the outside world. I stood slowly, my legs stiff, and started walking again, unsure of where I was headed. Each step crunched in the snow, each breath a cloud in the frozen air. I told myself I had survived the worst night of my life. I had been cast out like trash, humiliated and abandoned, but I was still standing. What I did not know then was that the night's cruelty was only the beginning, and that the message waiting on my phone would unravel a truth I never could have imagined. The morning after that terrible night broke gray and heavy, the kind of sky that presses down on you and makes every step feel slower. I dragged myself away from the frozen bench at the bus stop, my legs stiff from hours of shivering. My body ached, my throat raw, but the greater ache was inside me. I had been thrown out by my own dad, and the echo of his words still rang in my ears. "You are dead to me." It was as if those words had carved themselves into my skin. I kept walking with no destination, my boots crunching the snow, and let my mind drift back to the years that had carried me here. I thought of my mother. She had died in 2015, and with her went the warmth that had once filled our house. I remembered standing in the kitchen the morning of her funeral, staring at the empty coffee mug she had left by the sink the day before. She was only in her early 40s, too young to be gone, too young to leave me and my dad alone in that house that suddenly felt cavernous. In those first months after her death, my dad was a man I hardly recognized, silent at the dinner table, sitting in the dark living room long after midnight, a glass of whiskey in his hand. I had tried to be patient, to give him space, telling myself that grief changes people. What I never expected was that his grief would twist into bitterness that he would take out on me. 2 years later, he met Linda. She came into our lives with perfectly manicured nails, a sharp laugh, and eyes that always seemed to measure what she could take. At first, I tried to be polite, even kind. I knew my dad was lonely. He needed someone. But slowly, the atmosphere shifted. Linda had a way of turning every conversation into a criticism of me. If I was working late, she said I was irresponsible. If I stayed home, she said I was lazy. My dad, once my defender, began to echo her words as if they were his own. It was like losing him a second time. By the time they married in 2017, I already felt like an outsider in my own family. I remembered the first Christmas after they married. Linda had taken over the decorations, replacing my mother's handmade ornaments with shiny store-bought ones. The smell of cinnamon that once defined the season in our house was replaced by the artificial pine of a candle she lit in every room. She laughed when I tried to hang one of my mother's old ornaments, saying it was outdated. My dad had stood by silently letting her words stand as truth. That was the night I realized the house was no longer mine. It belonged to them, and I was just a guest who overstayed her welcome. The memory weighed on me as I walked through the empty streets that morning. The holiday lights still blinked from porches, mocking my loneliness. I thought about how I had clung to hope year after year that maybe something would change, that maybe my dad would see me again as his daughter. Last night had crushed that hope in the most final way. Still, as I trudged along, the faint sound of his cough from the night before lingered in my mind. It had been rough, deep, the kind of cough that makes you worry. For a moment I wondered if he was sick, if he was hiding something. But then I shook my head, angry at myself for even caring. He had made it clear I was nothing to him. Eventually, I reached a small diner on the corner of Maple and 10th, the kind of place that smells of bacon grease and burnt coffee. My hands were stiff as I pushed open the door, a little bell jingling overhead. The warmth hit me like a wave, and I nearly cried with relief. I slid into a booth near the window, peeling off my gloves, and ordered the cheapest breakfast on the menu. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and kind smile lines, looked at me with curiosity. I must have looked at a sight with my red eyes and rumpled coat. I forced a smile and said I had just had a long night. She nodded as if she understood more than I said. Sometimes strangers can see what the family refuses to do. As I sipped the weak coffee, my thoughts turned to money. I was already living paycheck to paycheck, working as an assistant for a hotel event planner. I paid rent on a small one-bedroom apartment not far from downtown, and there were weeks when I had to choose between groceries and gas. Now, without a family to turn to, I realized how alone I truly was. If my car broke down, if I got sick, if rent went up, there would be no safety net. The realization sat heavy on my chest. I told myself I would have to be strong, that I would find a way, but a part of me longed for the security that had been ripped away when my mother died. After breakfast, I stepped back out into the cold. The sky had grown darker with heavy clouds. Snow began to fall again in light flakes, dusting my hair and coat. I walked aimlessly for a while, passing storefronts decorated with holiday sales and families bustling inside. Each window I passed reflected my face back at me, pale and drawn, eyes haunted. I thought about calling a friend, but the shame held me back. How do you tell someone your dad has disowned you? How do you explain being locked out on Christmas? It felt humiliating, like an indictment of who I was, even though deep down I knew the blame lay with him. I found myself standing outside a small park where I used to play as a child. The swings were covered in snow, the slides slick with ice. I remembered my dad pushing me on those swings, his laugh booming as I squealed with delight. For a moment, the memory warmed me, and then it broke me, because that man no longer existed. In his place was someone hard and cruel, someone who looked at me with nothing but contempt. I sat on a snow-covered bench and let myself cry quietly, the sound muffled by the heavy air. My tears froze on my cheeks, but I did not care. I needed to let it out. Eventually, I pulled myself together. I told myself I had to stop replaying last night over and over. I needed to think about the future, about how to rebuild from here. Still, memories crowded in. I remembered overhearing Linda one evening talking on the phone, her voice sharp, discussing money in a way that made me suspicious. She mentioned something about accounts being shifted, about signatures. At the time, I thought little of it, but now the memory surfaced with new weight. I wondered if she was manipulating my dad financially, if his bitterness toward me was fueled not only by her words, but by her control over his money. The thought made my stomach twist. I pushed it aside, telling myself I had enough pain to carry without adding speculation. Yet the memory refused to fade, sitting in the back of my mind like a seed waiting to grow. The day stretched long and empty. I wandered through the city, ducking into stores to warm myself, spending coins on coffee I barely drank. Everywhere I went, I saw families together, children tugging at their parents' coats, couples holding hands. The contrast made my loneliness sharper. By late afternoon, I returned to my apartment, a small space with peeling paint and thin walls. I kicked off my boots, wrapped myself in a blanket, and collapsed on the couch. My body ached from the night outside, but it was my heart that hurt most. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying my dad's face as he shouted at me. No matter how many times I told myself to stop, the scene replayed, each time cutting deeper. As evening fell, I turned on the radio just to fill the silence. Carols played, voices singing of joy and peace, and I wanted to smash the dial. There was no joy, no peace, not for me. I turned it off and sat in the dark. For the first time, I wondered if my dad's words were a gift in a twisted way. Maybe being cast out would free me to build my own life, one untouched by their cruelty. The thought gave me a flicker of strength. I told myself I would survive even if it meant doing it alone. Yet as the night deepened, the sound of his cough returned to my mind. I had heard it. I was sure of it now. It was not just a passing tickle. It sounded deep painful. I remembered the way he had grabbed at his chest before slamming the door. A shiver ran through me. I tried to tell myself it was not my problem. He had made his decision. Still worry gnawed at me. What if he was sick? What if Linda was hiding it? I pulled the blanket tighter and forced myself to sleep, though the rest was uneasy, broken by dreams of my dad's angry face turning pale and sickly. The next morning I woke to the faint light of dawn filtering through my thin curtains. My phone lay on the nightstand, black and lifeless. I plugged it into the charger, not expecting much, but after a few moments the screen flickered to life. Notifications lit up, missed calls and messages stacked one after another. My heart raced as I reached for it. I tapped the screen, and there at the top of the list was a message from Sophia. Urgent. Call back immediately. When my phone finally powered back on the screen, lit up with a harsh glow in the dimness of my apartment. I blinked at the string of notifications, my heart jumping in my chest. At the very top of the screen above the missed calls and the junk emails sat a message from Sophia. Urgent. Call back immediately. The words cut through my fog of exhaustion and confusion. My stomach tightened, my throat went dry. I had not spoken to her since the night at my dad's house when I was thrown out. Her face had been pale, her eyes darting nervously toward Linda, but she had said nothing. Now seeing that message, I felt an uneasy mix of fear and curiosity. I sat up on the couch, wrapped tighter in the blanket, and stared at the phone as if it might bite. Part of me wanted to call her right away, but another part of me hesitated. What if it was a trap? What if she was reaching out on Linda's orders? I rubbed my temples, trying to shake off the paranoia. Sophia had always been gentle, a little shy, and although Linda tried to mold her into something else, I had seen glimpses of the girl who used to giggle with me late at night when we were younger. I tapped the phone nervously against my knee. Should I risk it? I had nothing left to lose. I hit the call button. The dial tone stretched on forever. When she finally answered, her voice was a whisper, tight with urgency. Vivian, thank God. I could hear the tremor in her tone. I swallowed hard. What is it, Sophia? What happened? She paused as if making sure no one was listening. Dad is not well. My body froze. I thought back to that cough, the way he had clutched his chest before shoving me out the door. My mind raced. Not well how? Sophia's words spilled out quick and shaky. I can't say everything here, please. Can you meet me? I need to talk to you in person. I asked where, and she suggested a small coffee shop near her campus. I agreed before I could second-guess myself. I hung up and sat there staring at the phone. My pulse pounded in my ears. What could be so urgent that she would risk reaching out? I thought of Linda's sharp laugh, the way she had watched me fall apart like it was entertainment. If Sophia was reaching out behind her back, it meant something serious. I stood, threw on my coat, and hurried out into the cold morning. The city was alive again after the stillness of the holiday. Cars hissed along the wet streets. People bustled with shopping bags, the smell of exhaust mixing with the bite of cold air. I caught the bus toward the university district. The ride felt endless. My reflection in the window looked, pale eyes shadowed with fatigue, lips chapped from the night in the snow. I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself to be calm, to listen carefully, to trust my instincts. Sophia would not have sent that message without reason. When I pushed open the door of the cafe, the warmth and the hum of voices wrapped around me. Students huddled with laptops, couples chatted over steaming mugs, and the smell of roasted beans filled the air. Sophia was already there, sitting at a corner table with her coat still on, her hands wrapped around a cup she had barely touched. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and she motioned quickly for me to sit. I slid into the chair across from her. For a moment, we just looked at each other. She seemed older than her 23 years, her face tight with worry. I finally whispered, "What is going on?" She leaned forward, voice trembling. "Vivian, Dad is sick. Really sick." I felt my breath catch. The words seemed both shocking and inevitable. I thought again of his cough, of his pallor. "What do you mean, sick?" She lowered her voice further. "I found Paper's medical records. He has a rare blood disorder. The doctor said he needs a bone marrow transplant." I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. My heart hammered in my chest. A bone marrow transplant. That was not something minor. That was life or death. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "He hasn't told anyone. Linda hides everything. She found the papers in his study and burned some of them, but I saw them before she could." I shook my head, trying to take it in. My dad, the man who had just told me I was dead to him, was hiding a disease that could kill him. A swirl of emotions rushed through me. Anger, fear, disbelief, and beneath it all, a flicker of something like pity. I whispered, "Why are you telling me this?" Sophia looked down at her hands. "Because the doctor's note said that the best chance for a match would be a biological child, and that means you." The words landed heavy, stealing the air from my lungs. I leaned back in the chair, dizzy. Me? The girl he had thrown out like garbage was the one person who might save his life. The irony was cruel. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream. Sophia reached across the table, her hand shaking. "I know it is too much," she said, "but I couldn't let you be in the dark. If Linda finds out I told you, she will never forgive me." I squeezed her hand, my mind spinning. "Does he know?" She shook her head. "He refuses to admit he is sick. He pretends everything is fine, but I see him at night, coughing until he can hardly breathe." The cafe noise faded around me. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart. I thought of my mother again, how she had always believed in compassion, in doing the right thing even when it was hard. But I also thought of the night at the house, the look on his face as he spat out those hateful words, "Dead to me." How could I reconcile the two truths, the dad who once carried me on his shoulders at the fair and the man who had locked me out in the snow? And now he needed me. Only me. Sophia pulled back her hand and glanced around nervously. "I should go," she whispered. "If Linda knows I met you, it will be bad." I nodded, still numb. She rose from her chair, pulling her coat tighter, and for a moment she looked like the little girl I used to protect from nightmares. She hesitated, then leaned down and hugged me quickly. "Be careful, Vivian." And then she was gone, swallowed into the stream of students outside. I sat there long after she left, staring at the cold coffee in front of me. My mind replayed every word. A blood disorder, a transplant. Only a biological child could match me. My hands trembled as I lifted the cup, the bitter taste grounding me. I had to decide what to do, but my heart was torn in 1,000 directions. Did he deserve help after the way he had treated me? Could I live with myself if I turned away? I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to block out the questions, but they pressed harder. No matter which way I turned, the truth waited for me. My dad's life hung in the balance, and I was the one who could tip the scale. I left the cafe with Sophia's words still buzzing in my ears like a swarm of angry bees. The air outside was sharp and bitter, and the falling snow stung against my cheeks, as if to keep me from drifting too far into disbelief. I pulled my coat tighter and walked with no clear direction, trying to steady my breath. A blood disorder. A bone marrow transplant. Me. The thought kept circling, hammering, dragging me into a storm of emotions I could not tame. It was as though my dad's voice from that night collided with Sophia's whisper. "Dead to me. You might be his only chance." The contradiction nearly broke me. The streets blurred as I walked. Holiday decorations hung heavy on storefronts, but the cheer they promised seemed cruel. I stopped in front of a pharmacy window where my reflection looked back, pale and shaken. I wondered if people passing by could see through me, if they knew I was carrying a secret bigger than myself. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth into the cold air just to feel lighter. Instead, I shoved my hands into my pockets and kept moving. My mind slipped back to my childhood, to the faint memory of my dad carrying me on his shoulders at a 4th of July parade, the sun hot on my skin, his laughter mixing with the crack of fireworks. That man felt like a ghost now unreachable, buried under years of anger and Linda's poison. Yet he was still my dad and his blood ran in my veins. By the time I reached my apartment, the daylight was fading. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs heavy as if I were carrying more than just my body. Inside the apartment was silent. I set my phone on this table and paced, the floor creaking under each anxious step. My thoughts tangled until I felt like I was drowning in them. How could I help him after everything? Was this fate forcing me into a role I did not want? I lay down on the couch staring at the cracks in the ceiling. The weight of choice pressed on me, cruel and relentless. Sleep refused to come, so I made tea and sat by the small window, watching flakes drift down under the streetlight. In that stillness, I began to remember more. Little moments I had buried. Like the day my dad taught me to ride a bike. I had fallen hard, skinning my knee, and he had scooped me up and told me I was braver than most kids. That memory stung because it reminded me of who he used to be before Linda, and bitterness consumed him. I closed my eyes and whispered into the empty room, "Why are you doing this to me?" There was no answer, only the hum of the radiator and the distant bark of a dog. The next morning, I woke up with a start to the sound of my phone buzzing on the table. It was an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something pushed me to answer. A deep voice introduced itself as Dr. Jameson from Cleveland Medical. My heart clenched. He explained that he had been treating Robert Parker and that my dad had authorized him to contact immediate family. I nearly laughed at the irony. Immediate family. I gripped the phone tighter, listening as he explained the seriousness of my dad's condition. Robert had refused to disclose it to anyone outside the household, but his health was deteriorating. The words are sharp and clear. Without a transplant, time was short. I asked why he was calling me now. The doctor hesitated, then said my name had come up in the compatibility notes. That was when I knew Sophia's discovery was not just a suspicion. It was real, documented, undeniable. My stomach turned as the doctor explained the testing process, the risks, the urgency. His voice was calm, professional, but the message behind it was clear. My dad's life depended on me. I told him I needed time and ended the call before my voice betrayed me. I sat there staring at the phone, feeling both cornered and powerful. For years, I had been powerless in that house, stripped of love, dignity, even a place at the table. Now suddenly I held something they could not control, my dad's survival. Later that day, Sophia texted again, a simple line. "Did he call you?" I typed back yes and added that I needed to think. She replied with a single word, "Please." That word carried her fear, her hope, her helplessness. I tossed the phone aside and buried my face in my hands. I wanted to help her because she was innocent in all this, caught between loyalty and cruelty. But the thought of helping him twisted inside me like a knife. I replayed his face at Christmas, the way he locked the door, Linda's laughter echoing in the background. My chest tightened with rage. He had chosen her over me time and again. Why should I save him now? I spent the afternoon trying to distract myself with chores. I scrubbed the counters, folded laundry, and organized the pantry. But every quiet moment drew me back to the same place. My dad's illness. My choice. My anger simmered with every memory of Linda. I thought of her smirk when she replaced my mother's ornaments, her cold voice calling me lazy, her sharp eyes watching for every mistake I made. The thought of her standing next to my dad while I saved his life made me sick. Would she gloat? Would she twist it into her own story of victory? I slammed a cupboard door and leaned against it, trembling with fury. That night I dreamed of my mother. She was in the kitchen, humming softly, stirring soup on the stove. I was a child again, sitting at the table, drawing pictures of us together. She turned, smiling, her eyes warm. Then her face blurred, her smile fading, and I heard her voice echo. "Do the right thing, Vivian." I woke with tears on my cheeks, my heart heavy. I wanted to scream at her for leaving me, for not protecting me from the storm that followed. But deep down, I knew she was right. She had always been my moral compass, and even in dreams, she tried to guide me. The following day, I decided I needed answers not from Sophia or the doctor, but from him. I needed to see my dad with my own eyes, to hear his voice without Linda's shadow. It was a reckless decision, but the uncertainty was eating me alive. I drove to the house on Birchwood Lane, the place that had been my home and had turned into a battleground. Snow crunched under my tires as I pulled into the street. Lights glowed in the windows, warm and golden, but to me they looked cold. My hands shook as I stepped out of the car, breath rising in white clouds. I walked up the familiar path, my boots sinking into the snow. The wreath on the door was new, gaudy, and artificial. I raised my hand to knock my heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo. The door opened before I touched it. Linda stood there, her smile sharp as glass. "Vivian, what a surprise." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. I clenched my jaw. "I need to see my dad." She tilted her head, studying me like prey. "He is resting. He doesn't want visitors." I pushed past her anger, surging. "I am not a visitor. I am his daughter." The living room smelled of disinfectant and cologne. My dad sat in his recliner, a blanket over his knees, a glass of water on the table beside him. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and when he looked up at me, I saw something I had not seen in years. Vulnerability. His lips parted, but no words came. I stood there, frozen, the air thick with everything unsaid. Linda's voice cut in sharp and commanding. "You need to leave. He doesn't want you here." My dad's eyes flickered between us, then settled on me. For the briefest second, I thought I saw regret. I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat closed. The silence stretched until Linda snapped. Vivian got out. I turned toward her, my voice low and steady. "No, not this time." My dad shifted in his chair, a cough racking his body, and I felt the pull of conflicting forces tearing at me. Anger, sorrow, a flicker of pity. I could not stay longer without breaking, so I turned and walked out, my heart hammering, my mind on fire. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. It was better than drowning in the poison of that house. As I drove away, headlights slicing through the snow, I knew nothing would ever be the same. I had seen him weak, fragile human. I had seen Linda's mask of control crack for a moment when I defied her. And I had felt the weight of the choice pressing harder than ever. My dad's life was slipping, and fate had placed the power in my hands. The road stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, and I gripped the wheel tighter, knowing that whatever came next, I could no longer pretend to be just a victim. I had become something else entirely. The night after I saw my dad sitting frail and blanketed in that recliner, I barely slept. I lay on my couch staring at the ceiling, my mind racing in jagged loops that never reached resolution. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, pale and sunken, nothing like the man who had once seemed larger than life. I also saw Linda's narrowed eyes, her body blocking the doorway as if she could shield him from me. My chest ached with anger and pity tangled into a knot. I turned over, pulled the blanket tighter, and told myself I would not cry again, but the tears came anyway. By dawn, I was exhausted and raw, but underneath the weariness, a spark of defiance had begun to burn. At work later that day, I tried to bury myself in tasks. The hotel was busy with a post-holiday convention, and the event planner I assisted barked orders over the phone while I set up tables with white linens and polished cutlery. The clink of silver against plates rang sharp in my ears. My coworkers joked and gossiped as if the world was ordinary. I forced smiles, but inside I felt detached, as though I were moving through fog. Between tasks, I checked my phone, half expecting another message from Sophia, but the screen stayed dark. I wondered if she was all right, if Linda had begun to suspect her. That thought made my stomach twist. At lunch, I sat alone in the break room with a sandwich I could not taste. I stared at the vending machine lights flickering and thought about control. For so long, Linda had controlled the house, my dad's ear, the atmosphere of every gathering. Now I carried knowledge she could not erase. My dad's sickness, the potential match that only I could provide. For once, she could not spin the story to her advantage, at least not completely. That realization was a small flame of power, and I clung to it. I told myself I needed to be careful, strategic. If I rushed, she would find a way to twist it. If I waited, I could decide how to use this. That evening, Sophia called from a friend's phone. Her voice was low and hurried. "Linda is on edge," she said. "She suspects something." "Be careful." I asked if our dad had gotten worse. Sophia hesitated, then admitted he had collapsed in the kitchen the night before. The paramedics came, but Linda told them it was just exhaustion. My throat tightened. He needed real care, not denial. I clenched the phone and told Sophia to stay strong, that I would figure something out. When we hung up, I sat in silence, trembling with anger. Denying medical help could kill him, and Linda would rather guard her image than admit weakness. I felt my teeth grind. For the first time, I thought of revenge not just as survival, but as justice. That night, I opened the old box of my mother's things I kept on the closet shelf. Inside were faded photos, a few letters, her silver locket. I held the locket in my palm, remembering how she used to say family is where truth lives. I whispered to her memory that the truth was what I had now, and I would not let Linda bury it. My chest filled with determination. I began to sketch in my mind what I might do, not only to confront my dad, but to expose Linda for what she was. The next day, I went back to the hospital where Dr. Jameson worked. I sat in his office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the faint smell of antiseptic in the air. He reviewed my blood test results carefully, then looked at me with cautious hope. "You are a potential match," he said. My hands shook on my lap. He explained the procedures, the risks, the steps that would follow if I agreed. His voice was calm, professional, but his eyes carried weight. He understood the magnitude of what he was asking. I asked if my dad knew. He shook his head. "Robert has refused to discuss it with anyone. Linda has been insistent on privacy, but he is running out of time." I left the office with the paperwork folded in my purse, heavy as stone. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window at the gray skyline. I thought about the choice again. To donate meant pain recovery time, but also the chance to save him. To refuse meant letting the disease win, letting Linda watch him fade without me intervening. Both paths were brutal. But for the first time, I realized that whichever path I chose, I had the power. My dad could not force me, Linda could not manipulate me. The decision was mine alone, and that knowledge filled me with a strange, fierce pride. That weekend, Sophia begged to meet me again. We sat in my car in a quiet parking lot, the windows fogging with our breath. She looked worn, her eyes ringed with dark circles. She told me Linda had been going through her phone, her drawers, even her school bag. I felt fury rise in me, but I kept my voice calm. "Stay careful," I said. "Do not let her find out we talk." Then she grabbed my hand, her voice breaking. "Vivian, please. If you can help him, you have to." I squeezed her hand back. I did not give her a promise, I could not. But I told her I would not walk away without thinking carefully. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I wiped them away like I had when she was a little girl and swore silently that I would not let Linda destroy her spirit. Over the following week, the tension built like a storm. At work, I made mistakes, dropping trays, forgetting details, earning sharp looks from my boss. At night, I lay awake, torn between voices in my head. One was my mother's urging compassion. Another was my own demanding justice for the years of cruelty. I found myself imagining scenes where Linda was exposed, her lies unraveling in front of neighbors, church members, even in front of my dad. The thought of her smug smile cracking gave me a surge of energy. I began to write notes, keep a record of what Sophia told me and what the doctor revealed. If I needed to fight, I would have proof. Finally, one bitter Tuesday evening, I found myself driving again to Birchwood Lane, my breath fogged in the car as I sat outside the house engine idling. Through the curtains, I saw the glow of the television, Linda's silhouette moving in the living room. My heart pounded. I knew this was reckless, but the pull was too strong. I wanted to look him in the eyes again to force him to see me, not just the puppet Linda wanted. I killed the engine and walked up the path, snow crunching underfoot. My hand shook as I knocked. This time my dad opened the door himself. His eyes widened when he saw me, and for a moment he looked almost relieved. Then his expression hardened. "Vivian." His voice was hoarse, strained. I asked if I could come in. He hesitated, then stepped aside. The living room smelled of stale smoke and medicine. He sank into his chair, coughing, while I sat on the edge of the couch. Linda was not there, at least not yet. I looked at him, really looked, and the words tumbled out. "I know about your illness. I know what you need." His face paled further. "Who told you I lifted my chin? That doesn't matter. What matters is that you cannot hide forever." He closed his eyes, pain etching deeper lines across his forehead. For a moment, I saw the man who had once been strong, now broken. I pressed on. "You told me I was dead to you, but I am the one who might save you." His eyes snapped open, searching mine, filled with shock and something like shame. Before he could answer, the front door banged open. Linda's voice cut through the air, sharp and angry. "What is she doing here?" She stormed in her coat, still on, eyes blazing. My dad started to speak, but she silenced him with a glare. I stood facing her squarely. "I am not leaving. Not this time." Her mouth twisted into a sneer. "You think you matter. You never did." The words sliced, but I did not flinch. My dad watched us, caught between us, his hands trembling on the arm of his chair. I stepped closer to Linda, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "He needs me. And that terrifies you." Her eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched. For the first time, I saw fear flicker there. I knew then that the balance was shifting. The power she had wielded so easily was slipping, and she felt it. I held her gaze until she looked away. Then I turned back to my dad. "We will talk again." I walked past her, my heart pounding, my body shaking. But inside me, the fire burned brighter. The game had changed. For once, she was not in control. I drove away into the night, the snow swirling in my headlights. My chest ached with both fear and exhilaration. I had stood my ground. I had spoken the truth. For years I had been silenced, dismissed, exiled. Now I had forced them both to see me. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. I was no longer powerless. The weight of choice still pressed on me, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a weapon I could wield when the time was right. The days after that confrontation at Birchwood Lane blurred into a restless haze, yet every detail of it replayed sharply in my mind. The way my dad's face drained when I told him I knew. The moment Linda's composure cracked and she realized I was not backing down. The air in that living room had been thick with something I had never felt. Before a shift of weight, a sliver of power tilting in my direction. I carried that feeling with me like a secret flame, but it did not make the nights any easier. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw his trembling hands, the deep cough rattling his chest. His sickness was not some rumor or exaggeration. It was real, urgent, and deadly. I went back to work at the hotel, but my focus fractured with every passing hour. Guests asked questions. I answered mechanically. My pen scratched across schedules that blurred together. My coworkers noticed. One of them, a kind older woman named Helen, touched my arm during the lunch break and asked if I was all right. I forced a smile and said I was tired. She gave me a look that said she knew more but would not press. I was grateful for her silence. The truth was too heavy to share. How could I explain that I held my dad's life in my hands, the same dad who had tried to erase me? At night, I sat by the window in my apartment with the city lights blinking, faintly in the distance. I flipped through the hospital paperwork again, my fingers tracing the black ink as though the words could make my decision for me. Consent forms, medical terms, warnings of risks. Each line pressed the reality deeper into my bones. If I said yes, it meant pain recovery, and tethering myself again to a man who had severed me from his heart. If I said no, it meant watching him fade while Linda tightened her grip on everything he left behind. Neither path felt clean. Both paths were drenched in consequence. One evening, as I stared at the papers, my phone buzzed. It was Sophia. She sounded shaky, her voice barely more than a whisper. Linda found the doctor's number in Dad's phone. She knows you might be a match. My blood ran cold. I asked what happened. Sophia said Linda confronted Dad, screaming that he was weak, that he could not trust me. I felt my throat tighten, fury boiling inside. Even as he gasped for breath, she cared more about control than his survival. Sophia begged me not to come to the house right then. She said Linda was in a rage, slamming doors, pacing like a guard dog. I promised I would stay away, though. Every nerve in my body screamed to go. That night, I dreamed of my dad as he had been when I was small. He stood at the edge of a lake, teaching me how to skip stones. The sun glinted on the water, his laugh was full and free. I felt safe then, unbroken, but the dream twisted. His face aged, his body thin, and the stones sank without a splash. He turned to me, eyes hollow, and said, "You are my only chance." I woke with sweat on my skin and tears on my pillow. The following morning, I called Dr. Jameson. My voice trembled as I asked what would happen if my dad refused to let me help. He sighed and said he could not force Robert to accept treatment, even from a compatible donor. My stomach clenched. So the decision was not only mine, it was his too, and Linda would poison his mind against me. I asked if there was a way to ensure the transplant could happen if I agreed. The doctor paused, then said the only path forward was Robert's consent. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles ached. Even now, when I finally had something he needed, he could still reject me. The thought cut deeper than I expected. Later that week, I met Sophia again, this time in the quiet corner of the library at our campus. Her eyes darted nervously as she slipped into the seat across from me. She whispered that Dad had gotten worse. He barely left his chair, his skin was gray, his cough endless. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting back the urge to cry. Sophia said Linda kept telling the neighbors that Dad was fine, just tired, that she could handle everything. The lie twisted in my chest. I asked Sophia if Dad had spoken of me since that night. She nodded faintly. "He asked once where you were," she said. "Linda told him you were gone for good." My throat closed. For good. Those words echoed again, a cruel refrain. I reached across the table and squeezed Sophia's hand. "Stay strong," I said. "Do not let her break you." She gave me a trembling smile, but I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. At that moment, I realized this fight was not only about my dad or Linda. It was about Sophia, too. About giving her a chance to live free of the manipulation that had twisted our lives. That thought steadied me. Revenge and justice were tangled now, but so was love. My choices would shape not just me, but her. A few days later, I got another call, this time from my dad himself. His voice was thin, rasping, and each word carried effort. "Vivian," he said, "you need to stop." I froze. "Stop what?" He coughed hard, then whispered, "Stop stirring things. Linda says you are trying to control me." My hand shook as I gripped the phone. "Control you?" I wanted to laugh, to scream. I swallowed the rage and forced calm into my voice. "Dad, I only want to help." He was silent for a long moment, then said, "I cannot trust you." The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone, my heart pounding. My dad's voice had carried fear, but not of me, of her. Linda was speaking through him even when he called me. I felt the walls of my chest closing in. I slammed my fist on the table, the sound echoing in the small apartment. The rage that flooded me was hot and sharp. She had stolen enough. She had twisted enough. This time I would not let her win. The next weekend, there was a community dinner at the church my family had attended for years. I had avoided it since my mother's death, unable to face the whispers, the pitying looks. But when I heard from Sophia that Linda planned to parade my dad there to prove he was fine, something inside me snapped. I could not let her control the story anymore. I put on my coat and drove through the falling snow to the church, my stomach in knots. Inside the hall, the smell of casseroles and coffee filled the air. Families laughed. Children ran between tables. Holiday decorations still hung. And then I saw them. My dad slumped at a table, pale and thin, with Linda beside him. Smiling too brightly, her hand clamped on his arm as if to hold him upright. My chest burned. I walked straight toward them. Conversations hushed around me, eyes turning. Linda's smile froze when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. I ignored her and looked at my dad. His eyes met mine, weary and clouded, but something flickered there. Recognition, maybe even relief. I spoke clearly, my voice carrying across the room. "Dad, you are sick." "You need treatment. I can help you." The room went silent. Linda's face twisted, panic flashing behind her mask. She snapped, "Liar. Do not listen to her. She is nothing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My dad coughed violently, clutching his chest, and the sound filled the hall. People rushed closer, concern rising. I knelt by his chair, gripping his trembling hand. "Dad, please. Let me be the one to help." His lips trembled, eyes wet with something he could no longer hide. For a moment, it felt like the world balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for his choice. Linda yanked at his arm, trying to pull him away, her voice shrill with desperation. But the eyes of the community were on us now. Neighbors, friends, people who had known my mother. They saw, they heard. The truth was no longer hidden. My dad sagged back in his chair, torn, broken. I looked up at Linda, and for the first time she looked small. Her power cracked under the weight of witnesses. My chest heaved, my hands trembled, but inside me the fire blazed. The fight was no longer in the shadows. It was in the open, and I was not afraid. The church hall still echoed with the sound of his cough long after the dinner ended. People had gathered around, offering water, murmuring concern, their eyes darting between my dad and Linda. I stayed kneeling beside his chair, my hand wrapped tightly around his, feeling the bones sharp under his skin. He had looked at me with a flicker of something I had not seen in years, something that almost resembled trust or maybe desperation. Linda had tried to shield him, to drag him away, but too many eyes had witnessed the truth. For the first time in years, the story was no longer hers to tell. It belonged to everyone in that room, and they saw what I had seen all along. He was sick, and he was hiding it. I drove home that night with my hands trembling on the wheel. The snow blurred under the headlights, the wipers scraping rhythmically, but my mind was elsewhere. My dad's eyes haunted me. The words I had spoken in front of everyone hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. I had forced the truth into the open, and now the entire community knew. Part of me felt relief, a fierce pride at having broken Linda's facade. Another part of me felt terror. What if it backfired? What if he retreated further under her control? I clenched the wheel tighter, whispering to myself that it was too late for fear. The secret was out. The storm had begun. The following day, Sophia called in a hushed voice. Her words tumbled out quickly. "Linda is furious. She is saying you humiliated them in front of everyone. She has been shouting all morning. Dad has barely spoken. He just sits there coughing, staring into space." I closed my eyes and breathed slowly. The image of that house filled with tension made my chest ache. I asked if she was safe. She whispered that she was staying quiet, keeping her head down, but that she was scared. I told her to hold on, that she was not alone. When I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the chipped edge, and told myself that fear was what Linda wanted. She thrived on silence and intimidation. But silence was broken now. I had cracked it wide open, and there was no going back. That evening, I walked to the corner store to buy groceries. The cold air bit my cheeks as I pulled my scarf tighter. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the smell of oranges and bread wrapped around me. As I reached for a carton of milk, a voice called my name. I turned to see Mrs. Henderson, an older neighbor from my childhood street, her arms full of canned goods. Her eyes softened as she looked at me. "Vivian, I was at the dinner. You were brave." She touched my arm gently. "People needed to hear the truth. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." My throat tightened. I thanked her, my voice shaky, and realized then that the truth had already begun to ripple. Linda's power had been built on reputation, on controlling what people saw. Now the cracks were visible, and others had noticed. Later that week, Dr. Jameson called again. His tone was measured, careful. He said my dad's condition was worsening quickly. His blood counts were dropping, infections becoming a serious risk. He asked if I had spoken to my dad directly. I told him what had happened at the church. He sighed, then said my dad had to agree soon or there might not be enough time. My chest tightened with dread. I asked what would happen if he refused. The doctor's pause was enough. I thanked him and hung up, then sat in silence, my heart pounding. I felt the walls closing in. Time was no longer on my side. That night I drove past Birchwood Lane again. I did not stop, but I parked at the end of the street and watched the house from a distance. The curtains were drawn tight, no light spilling through, as if the house itself wanted to shut out the world. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, my breath fogging the glass. I imagined my dad inside his body, frail Linda, pacing like a sentinel. I whispered to myself that I would not beg. I had begged too many times in that house for scraps of love, for acknowledgement, for a place at the table. This time I would wait. The truth was out, and sooner or later it would corner them. The waiting gnawed at me. Each day at work felt endless, each night restless. I walked the city streets in the evenings, the lights glowing on wet pavement, trying to exhaust my body enough to quiet my mind. Sometimes I caught myself staring at dads with their children, the easy way they bent down to listen, the warmth in their gestures. A pang of jealousy and grief struck me each time. I wondered what it would feel like to have that bond without conditions, without cruelty. I wondered if it was something I would ever know. One night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. It was past midnight. I answered quickly, fearing the worst. Sophia's voice cracked with tears. He collapsed again. This time they had no choice. He is at the hospital. My body jolted upright, adrenaline flooding me. I asked which hospital. She whispered the name before hanging up quickly, afraid Linda would hear. I threw on my coat, grabbed my keys, and drove into the night. The streets slick with ice, my hands clenched on the wheel, my heart hammered with dread and urgency. This was it. The moment I had been both fearing and expecting. When I reached the hospital, the lobby was quiet, the sterile smell sharp in the air. I hurried to the front desk, gave my name, and the nurse directed me to the floor. My boots squeaked on the polished linoleum as I moved quickly down the hall. At the end of it, I saw Linda pacing outside a room, her face tight with fury. When her eyes landed on me, her expression hardened. "You are not welcome here," she snapped. I lifted my chin, my voice steady. "I am family." She opened her mouth to retort, but at that moment the door opened and Dr. Jameson stepped out. His eyes flicked between us, then settled on me. He gave a small nod. "You can come in." Linda's face flushed red, her lips curling, but she could not stop me. I pushed past her and stepped into the room. My dad lay on the bed, pale as the sheets tubes running into his arm, monitors beeping softly. His eyes fluttered open and landed on me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The room was thick with unspoken words, decades of them. I stepped closer, my throat tight. "Dad?" His lips parted, his voice faint, raw. "Vivian." My knees weakened, hearing my name in his voice again. I sat beside him, my hand hovering before I dared to touch him. His skin was cold, fragile, nothing like the strong hands I remembered from childhood. My eyes burned with tears, but I blinked them back. He whispered, "I do not deserve you." The words pierced me deeper than anger ever had. Before I could answer, the door swung open. Linda marched in her heels, clicking her face like stone. She pointed at me sharply. "Out! You are poisoning him!" I stood slowly, turning to face her. My voice was calm, low. "No, Linda. The poison has always been you." For a moment, the air stilled. My dad's weak hand gripped mine tighter, his eyes shifting to Linda. "Enough." His voice was thin but carried weight. She froze, stunned. He repeated, "Enough." She tried to protest, but he closed his eyes, as if the effort of speaking had drained him. The monitor beeped steadily, the only sound in the silence that followed. I looked at Linda, really looked, and saw the fear beneath her rage. For years she had held control, but in that hospital room with witnesses and machines keeping him alive, her control was slipping. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, but I felt something new rising inside me. This was not just about saving him. It was about reclaiming what she had stolen. She glared at me one last time, then stormed out, her heels echoing down the hall. I turned back to my dad, his eyes barely open, his breathing shallow. He whispered again, almost inaudibly, "Help me." My tears finally fell hot and unstoppable. I squeezed his hand and nodded. For the first time in years, he had asked me, not her. The choice was no longer distant. It was here, staring at me in that sterile room. The hours after my dad whispered those two words felt like a lifetime, stretched thin and trembling. "Help me!" They echoed in my head as I sat in the hospital chair, the glow of the monitor painting shadows across his frail body. I could not tell if he realized the weight of what he had asked, if he understood the contradiction of pleading with the same daughter he had cast out. But the sound of his voice, broken and desperate, pierced through the years of silence and cruelty. For the first time since I was a child, he needed me more than I needed him. The power of that truth left me shaken. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the window of my apartment, staring at the city lights flickering through the winter fog. I held the hospital forms in my hands, the papers that could mean the difference between life and death. The words blurred as I thought about my mother. I remembered her last Christmas with us, how she had wrapped me in a red scarf she knitted, her fingers smoothing the fabric as if she knew she would not be around much longer. She had always believed in forgiveness, in choosing compassion even when it hurt. I wondered what she would say if she were sitting beside me now. Part of me felt she would want me to save him. Another part believed she would want me to protect myself from further wounds. I whispered into the empty room asking for her guidance, but only silence answered. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. The halls smelled of disinfectant and coffee nurses moved briskly, their sneakers squeaking on the tile. My stomach clenched with every step closer to his room. When I pushed open the door, Linda was already there. Perched stiffly in a chair, her eyes narrowed at me. She did not speak, but the hatred in her gaze was enough. My dad lay asleep, his breathing shallow, the monitor beeping in rhythm. I stood quietly at the foot of the bed, my arms crossed, refusing to be chased away. Minutes stretched like hours until Sophia slipped in, her eyes darting nervously between us. She sat on the edge of the bed and touched our dad's hand gently. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and for a moment he looked at us as if he did not recognize who we were. Linda leaned close to him, her voice syrupy. "Robert, you need rest. Do not let her upset you." My dad's eyes drifted past her and settled on me. I saw something shift there, small but undeniable. He rasped out my name again. "Vivian." My chest tightened, tears threatening, but I held his gaze steady. "I am here, Dad." His lips trembled as if he wanted to say more, but Linda cut in sharply. "She should not be here. She is only trying to make herself important." The words stung, but I did not flinch. I turned to Linda, my voice calm but firm. "I am not leaving," he asked me. Her face reddened with fury. Sophia reached out, squeezing my hand under the blanket, a silent signal of support. The tension in that room could have shattered glass. Nurses came and went, adjusting monitors, pretending not to notice the storm brewing between us. At one point, Dr. Jameson entered, flipping through charts, and looked directly at my dad. "Robert, we need to discuss options. Without treatment, your time is very limited." He spoke gently but firmly. My dad closed his eyes, the weight of denial pressing down on him. Linda bristled, ready to interject, but the doctor raised a hand. "This is not about appearances. It is about survival." Then his eyes flicked to me. "We have a potential donor." The air thickened instantly. Linda's head snapped toward me, her face twisted with rage. My dad opened his eyes slowly, looking at me as if truly seeing me for the first time. Silence stretched between us all, heavy and suffocating. After the doctor left, Linda leaned over the bed, her voice sharp and poisonous. "You cannot let her do this. She will use it against you." My dad's hand trembled against the sheet. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "I do not want anything from you. I just want the truth to matter, for once, Dad." His eyes filled with moisture, his lips quivered, but no words came. He turned his face slightly toward me, away from Linda, and I knew then that something inside him had shifted. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall she had built. That night, Sophia and I sat in the hospital cafeteria, the hum of vending machines filling the silence. She picked at a sandwich while I stirred a coffee I could not drink. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "I have never seen him look at you like that, not in years." I nodded, my throat tight. "I do not know what it means, but I know Linda feels it slipping." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I am so tired of living in her shadow, of pretending." I squeezed her hand and promised her that it would not last forever. We sat there, two sisters caught between grief and resolve, and for the first time I felt less alone. The following days blurred into hospital visits and restless nights. Each time I entered the room, Linda tried to push me out, but I refused. Sometimes neighbors or family friends stopped by, their faces filled with concern. They saw me there sitting quietly at his side, and they saw Linda's scowl. The whispers grew louder. Reputation, the very thing she clung to, was unraveling thread by thread. I watched it happen with a mixture of grim satisfaction and sorrow. She had built her control on appearances, and now the facade was cracking in front of everyone. One afternoon, as I sat by his bed while he dozed, I remembered a night long ago when he had carried me in from the car after I fell asleep on the drive home. I remembered the warmth of his chest, the steady beat of his heart, the safety I felt in his arms. The memory ached, but it also reminded me that he was not just the man who hurt me. He was also the man who once loved me. I leaned forward and whispered softly, "I do not know if I can forgive you, but I cannot watch you fade." His hand twitched slightly as if he heard me in his sleep. On the third night, everything erupted. Linda cornered me in the hallway outside his room, her voice low and venomous. "If you go through with this, if you make him believe he needs you, you will regret it." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "I already regret every year you stole from me. But those years are over." Her lips curled in a sneer, but I saw it again, that flicker of fear. She turned sharply and walked away, her heels clicking furiously against the tile. I stood there shaking with adrenaline, but also with a deep certainty. She was losing her grip, and she knew it. Later that night, my dad asked to speak to me alone. His voice was weak, but there was clarity in his eyes. "Vivian, I was wrong." The words came halting, broken, but real. I felt tears, well, my chest tightening, but I stayed quiet, letting him speak. He said he had listened to Linda for too long, let her words poison him, let his grief turn him cruel. He whispered that he missed my mother every day, that sometimes he pushed me away because I reminded him of her too much. The confession cracked something in me, anger and sorrow colliding. I whispered back, "You nearly broke me, Dad." His eyes filled with tears. "I know." His hand squeezed mine faintly. "Can you forgive me?" I could not answer. Not yet. But I held his hand tighter, letting him know that I was still there. The night ended with me sitting in the dark hospital room, the monitor beeping steadily, his breath shallow but even. I stared at his fragile frame, at the weight of years between us, and knew that the road ahead would not be simple. But for the first time it felt possible. The choice was still mine, the power still in my hands. And I realized then that revenge did not have to be about destruction. Sometimes the greatest revenge was survival, and becoming the one person they could not erase. I leaned back in the chair, exhausted but steady, and let the sound of the monitor carry me into uneasy rest. The hospital room grew quieter as the days passed, though the tension between Linda and me never softened. My dad drifted in and out of sleep, his body shrinking into the sheets, but his eyes always seemed to search for me when he woke. That shift unsettled Linda more than anything. She had ruled the story for so long that watching his attention slip away from her felt like sand pouring through her fingers. I felt it too, the weight of being the one he reached for, and it pressed on me with equal parts sorrow and vindication. On the morning that began everything, I arrived to find Sophia already there, sitting at his side, her face pale. She looked up at me with eyes full of worry. "The doctors were clear last night. If he does not agree now, it will be too late." I sank into the chair beside her, my hand brushing hers briefly. I knew what she meant without her saying it. Time had run out, and choices could no longer be delayed. I glanced at my dad, his chest rising shallowly, his skin so fragile I thought it might tear if I touched him too hard. He opened his eyes and whispered my name again, his voice barely audible. The sound pulled me closer, almost against my will. I leaned down my ear near his lips. He whispered that he was ready to listen. Before I could answer, the door opened sharply and Linda swept in, carrying a bag of clothes and a thermos of tea. Her heels clicked against the tile, her perfume too strong in the sterile air. She set the bag down with a loud thud and glared at me. "What are you doing here again? He needs peace, not your chaos." I stood, my voice low but steady. "He asked for me." Her face twisted red, spreading across her cheeks. "You are poisoning him with guilt. You always bring up the past because it is all you have." I took a step closer to her, my pulse quickening. "No, Linda. The past is what he gave me. I am here because the truth is all that is left." She sneered, but her eyes flickered nervously toward my dad. His lips parted and a faint sound came out. "Enough." We both froze. He repeated stronger this time, "Enough." The room held stillness like glass ready to shatter. He turned his head toward me, his voice a rasp. "Vivian, tell me what I must do." My chest tightened. For years I had imagined this moment, the tables turned, the power resting in my hands. Yet standing there looking down at him, I felt no triumph. Only the heavy weight of choice. I told him the truth, that a transplant was possible, that my body was a match, but that he had to decide whether to fight or surrender. His eyes closed, tears pooling, and for the first time I saw him not as the man who cast me out, but as a man afraid of dying. The sight broke something in me that I did not know was still fragile. Linda erupted, then her voice shrill. "You cannot trust her. She will ruin you." "She is only doing this for attention." The words bounced against the sterile walls, but I saw her hands trembling as she gripped the bed rail. She was desperate, cornered, afraid of losing her throne. My dad opened his eyes again slowly and looked at her. "I have listened to you long enough," he whispered, her face crumpled, disbelief washing over her. He turned back to me, his hand trembling as it reached for mine. "Will you help me?" My breath caught. The years of pain, the banishment, the cruel words, all collided with the sound of that plea. I nodded, tears streaming down my face, unable to speak. He closed his eyes, exhausted, but at peace with the choice he had made. That night, Sophia and I sat outside the hospital under the dull glow of the parking lot. Lights. The cold air bit at our faces and we huddled into our coats. She whispered that she never thought she would hear him say those words, never thought he would admit that Linda had been wrong. I admitted that I had not either, that part of me had stopped believing it was possible. We sat in silence, the sounds of distant traffic humming around us. For the first time in years, it felt like the ground under us had shifted, like the story was no longer written by Linda's hand. The following day brought chaos. News of his condition had spread, and relatives began to arrive. Aunts, uncles, and even old friends stopped by the hospital, their voices hushed, their eyes filled with pity. They found me there, sitting quietly at his side, and the whispers started again. Maybe the girl they cast out was not what Linda had painted her to be. Maybe the truth was different. I saw it in their eyes, the doubt, the sympathy, the cracks forming in the story Linda had fed them. She noticed it too, and her fury grew sharper with every glance cast my way. At one point, she cornered me outside his room, her voice low and vicious. "You think you have won, but you will regret this." I looked her in the eye, my voice steady. "I already regret every day I let you break me. Never again." Her face contorted, but for the first time I saw fear there, not just anger. She turned abruptly, storming down the hall, her heels echoing like warning shots. I leaned against the wall, my body shaking with adrenaline. But inside I felt a strange calm. The tide had turned. The power she had held for so long was slipping, and she could not stop it. The days that followed were filled with preparations, with endless tests and consultations. Each time I signed a paper or gave another vial of blood, I felt the years of rejection peel away like old skin. I was no longer the girl cast out at Christmas, no longer the daughter told she was dead to her dad. I was the one carrying his chance at life, the one rewriting the story he had buried me under. And though part of me ached with anger, another part felt the weight of transformation. Revenge had always been in my mind, but standing there watching Linda crumble, I realized that living as the one who could not be erased was the truest revenge of all. On the evening before the procedure, I walked into his room to find him awake, his eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. He gestured weakly for me to come closer. When I sat beside him, he whispered that he had dreams of my mother lately, that she was standing at the edge of a field waiting. He said he thought she was telling him it was not too late to make things right. My throat tightened as tears filled my eyes. I told him quietly that she would want him to fight, that she would want him to remember who he once was. His hand squeezed mine faintly, and I felt the tremor of his breath. I whispered that whatever happened tomorrow, he would not face it alone. For the first time, I believed it myself. As I left the hospital that night, the snow was falling gently, blanketing the streets in white. The world felt hushed, suspended, as if it was holding its breath. I walked slowly to my car, each step crunching softly, and let the flakes melt on my face. Tomorrow will decide everything. Tomorrow, the years of silence and cruelty, of exile and pain, would culminate in a single act. Whether it saved him or not, the truth was already mine. I slid into the car, the cold leather shocking against my skin, and sat there for a long time staring at the glowing hospital windows. I whispered to myself that the story was no longer Linda's. It was mine. And no matter what happened next, she could never take it back. The morning of the procedure arrived heavy with silence. I woke before the sun rose. The sky outside my window painted in muted shades of gray, snowflakes drifting down like fragments of ash. My body ached from days of little sleep, yet my mind refused to rest. I stood in front of the mirror in the small bathroom of my apartment, staring at my reflection. My face looked pale, my eyes rimmed with red, but there was a steadiness there too. This was the day that would change everything. No matter what happened, nothing could ever return to the way it had been. At the hospital, the halls seemed quieter than usual, as if the world itself had slowed to witness what was about to unfold. Nurses moved softly, voices low, machines humming like distant whispers. When I reached my dad's room, Sophia was already there, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup of coffee she had not touched. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "He is awake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He asked for you." My heart pounded as I stepped inside. My dad lay propped up by pillows, his skin pale, but his eyes more focused than they had been in weeks. When he saw me, his lips trembled into a faint smile. "Vivian," he rasped. His voice cracked with exhaustion. For a moment, I simply stood there, unable to speak, my throat tight. Finally, I walked closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I am here," I told him softly. His eyes glistened, and I could see tears welling that he tried to blink away. "I never thought I would see this day," he whispered. "Neither did I admitted. Linda was nowhere in sight, though I knew she would not be far. It gave me a small measure of peace to have this moment alone with him. He reached for my hand, his grip weak but determined. "I was wrong," he said, each word sounding like it cost him a piece of strength. "I listened too long to bitterness, to fear. I let it turn me into someone you did not deserve." My throat ached as I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "You broke me, Dad." His eyes filled, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I know," he whispered. "But if you let me, I will spend whatever time I have left trying to mend what I broke." Before I could answer, the door opened and Linda swept in, her face tight, her eyes darting between us. She held herself tall, but there was no mistaking the panic beneath her polished exterior. She began speaking quickly, her words sharp. "You do not have to do this, Robert. It is dangerous. It is unnecessary." Her voice shook ever so slightly, betraying the fear she tried to hide. He turned his head slowly toward her, his voice hoarse but firm. "Enough, Linda." The word hung in the air like a final judgment. She froze, her mouth opening to argue, but he lifted his hand weakly, silencing her. For the first time in years, she had no power left in that room. The doctors arrived soon after, their presence brisk and efficient. They explained the steps of the procedure again, though I had heard it countless times before. Still, I listened, each word anchoring me to the gravity of the moment. Consent forms were placed before my dad, his trembling hand guided by Sophia as he signed. Linda hovered near the corner, her arms crossed tightly. But her silence was more telling than any of her past words. She had lost. Not in some dramatic battle, but in the quiet surrender of truth finally seen. As the nurses prepared me, I lay on the hospital bed in the pre-op room, the sterile lights glaring above me. My thoughts raced, images of my mother flickering through my mind. I remembered her voice, soft and steady, telling me once that real strength was not in holding grudges, but in choosing when to let go. I thought about that now, wondering if this was my chance to let go, or if it was simply my chance to take back what had been stolen from me. My chest rose and fell in rapid breaths as the anesthesiologist spoke gently, his voice calm, guiding me into stillness. I closed my eyes, whispering silently to myself that I was not doing this for Linda, not even entirely for my dad. I was doing it for me, for the girl who had been thrown out on Christmas night, told she was dead to her own dad. This was my act of defiance, my declaration that I was still here. When I woke, the world was hazy, the edges blurred, my body heavy with exhaustion. The room around me was quiet, the machines humming softly. Sophia was there, her face streaked with tears, but her smile wide with relief. "It went well," she whispered. "He is stable." My body ached, every muscle drained, but a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken control of the story that had always been written without me. Later, when I was strong enough to sit up, they wheeled me to his room. He lay sleeping, his chest rising and falling steadily, his face softer than I had seen in so long. Linda sat in the corner, her eyes red, her posture slumped. She looked nothing like the woman who had once laughed as I was thrown out of that house. She looked defeated, smaller somehow. When she saw me, she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She lowered her gaze, silent. I sat quietly by his bed, watching him breathe, and for the first time I felt no anger toward her, only pity. She had built her world on lies and control, and now she was left with nothing. In the days that followed, as I recovered, my dad slowly regained strength. The doctors said it would be a long road, but he had a chance. Each day he seemed to look at me with more clarity, as if remembering not only who I was, but who he had once been. He began speaking of the past, of my mother, of regrets he carried. Sometimes I listened in silence, sometimes I spoke, but always I felt the weight of years shifting. The bond was fragile, stitched together with new thread, but it was there, and that alone felt like victory. When I finally returned home one evening, I sat by the window with a blanket wrapped around me, watching the snow fall over Cleveland. The city lights glowed softly, the world quiet and still. I thought of everything that had happened, of the years of exile, the cruelty, the pain. I thought of the little girl I had been, begging for scraps of love at that dining table, only to be cast out like nothing. And I thought of the woman I had become, standing strong in that hospital room, refusing to be erased. Revenge had been my fuel for so long, but sitting there I realized something deeper. The truest revenge was not in watching Linda lose. It was in reclaiming myself and surviving every wound they gave me, and still choosing to live. It was in the fact that I had become the person they could not destroy, the one who carried the power they once tried to strip away. So this is where my story pauses. My dad is alive, the road ahead uncertain, but I no longer carry the same weight of silence. Linda lingers in the shadows, her voice quieter now, her control broken. Sophia and I speak every day, rebuilding the bond we were nearly denied. And I stand stronger than ever, not because they gave me strength, but because I found it within myself when they tried to take it away. If you have ever been told you were nothing, if you have ever been cast aside by those who should have loved you, I hope my story reminds you that survival itself is power. That living with dignity, reclaiming your voice, is the sweetest revenge of all. Tell me, have you ever faced a moment where you had to rise from the ashes of someone else's cruelty? Share your story with me. And if my journey has touched you, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts below. Together we can remind each other that no one has the power to erase us.